Welcome back to The Closer Cut with me, Waseem Mirza, the show where we cut through the noise and get closer to what actually shapes how we lead and work. Well, today I'm joined by Cortney Harding, the founder of Friends With Holograms, Emmy-nominated producer, top 100 global woman in AI, and author of The Spatial Race. She builds the immersive experiences that train people at companies like Amazon, Walmart, Target, and PricewaterhouseCoopers on the hardest of workplace issues. She's just published a Forbes piece arguing that smart glasses need a BlackBerry moment before an iPhone one, and that the office, not the factory floor, is where they'll go mainstream. Well, I'm pleased to say that she's with me now, all the way from New York. Cortney Harding, welcome to The Closer Cut. It's a pleasure having you here.
Thank you so much for having me.
Now, you started in music journalism way back. Take me back to that moment and what then later led you to change course.
Yeah, so I started as a music journalist right after graduate school. I was fortunate enough to pretty much immediately after grad school get a job as a staff writer and subsequently an editor at Billboard magazine. And I was there for several years, had a really amazing run, had a lot of fun, but at some point in the mid 2010s, realized that long form print journalism was not, shall we say, a growth industry. And at the time, everyone was saying pivot to tech, which worked, I guess, for a while until recently. But yeah, so I decided to make the pivot to tech. I had sort of a soft pivot for a couple of years between working at Billboard and then starting in the virtual reality space, where I was working with music tech startups. So I was doing business development, strategy, all of that with music tech startups. And then was doing well, was liking it, but that market was starting to fizzle a little bit. And then just happened to see a virtual reality experience in 2015 at an art gallery. Had no idea what it was, but in the 2.5, 3 minutes that I was in a headset, it changed the trajectory of my entire life. And I really went all in on virtual reality after that and wound up on a panel at South by Southwest in 2016 with a guy who was starting a VR agency, had some interesting clients lined up. Started working with him, was doing, again, biz dev strategy, but also learned a lot about content creation and virtual reality, sort of how you actually make it. And so from there, I was with him for about a year and a half, split off to start my own company, and that's really where I got super into more of the training space, which is where I've been focused, for the last several years.
And take me back to that moment when you first put on the VR headset. You described before how it had literally changed your world.
I think my initial reaction was like, "Oh, this is cool, this is fun," but what really struck the chord for me was after. So, this is such a vivid memory for me. It was a freezing, bitter cold day in February in New York, and I almost didn't go to this event. It was an artist, a musician that I really liked, and she was having a show at this art museum, and I kind of thought, "Oh, it's too cold, maybe I'll just stay home and watch a movie," and then I went, and I'm mostly very glad. Sometimes I regret that, but mostly very glad that I went. And so when I put on the headset, it was just this very sort of simple experience. I mean, this was very early days, but it stuck with me in a really interesting way. And so I remember leaving the art museum, getting on the subway to go home, and seeing out of the corner of my eye things that I'd seen in that VR experience. Like, it just stuck with me so much. And I really couldn't get it out of my head how powerful it was, not just as a medium for art, but as a medium for learning and a medium for communication. And so that's, I think, where, the portal opened up for me and the journey really started, was sort of that after effects of, okay, there's something here and I can't quite put my finger on it. Um, but believing that there was something there and kind of growing with it.
What do you make of the way in which the world of work is now adopting this technology or not, as the case may be?
Well, it's not very good right now, to be perfectly honest. We are in a deep VR winter. We've had some downs, ups and downs in the past 10 years, but this, I'd say, is the weakest market for virtual reality. I think that's due to the fact that Meta has really pulled back on a lot of their initial investment. And other companies, while they do have headsets, are not leaning into making them successful. There are some companies like Pico, which is owned by ByteDance, TikTok's parent company. They have amazing headsets. They're very focused on work, productivity, enterprise. They are really leaning in, but they simply don't have the muscle and the budgets at this point that like a player like Meta does. So, Meta is still technically in the market. Google technically has a headset. They marketed it for like 3 minutes, right? Apple has the Vision Pro. That has been to watch a company like Apple, who I believed in so much, fumble the Vision Pro so badly, so very badly fumbled it, has been a real eye opener and really unfortunate. Um, so I think we're just at this point where, things broadly in the market are very stalled. I think we've seen that in the overall economy. Everyone is kind of plunging their money into AI without fully understanding what it's going to do next. And so we're at this point in VR where, yeah, I mean, people are still using it. It's not like it has disappeared. But in terms of scaling, I think that we've hit a point where it's gotten very difficult to scale it in a meaningful way because of the lack of investment from both sides. Um, that doesn't mean that I've stopped believing in it or creating for it or loving it, but I think it's just the market right now for VR is very challenging. So what I've done is pivoted a little bit, half pivot, or expansion to smart glasses because I really see a lot of the future as being head-mounted devices, whether that is fully immersive headsets, whether that's smart glasses. Like the idea of head-mounted way of working with the world instead of what we have now, which are these flat screens that are kind of more distant with our smartphones, our tablets, our laptops. So I see that broader shift, and there's a lot of crossover between how do you design for virtual reality and how do you design for smart glasses in terms of interaction design, spatial engineering, all of that. So that's where I think things in the near term are going to go. I think in the longer term, VR will still be very important. It'll still have really strong use cases, but I think smart glasses will be kind of the daily wearable for most people. I mean, you can trace it back to Google Glass 1.0, which came out in 2013 now. That was widely considered a failure at the time. But the bones of what they were building, I think, was really interesting. And now you've seen it come back around. So there have been some interesting false starts, right? North Focals in 2019 were, I thought, a fantastic pair of glasses, but they couldn't quite get the scale. They couldn't quite get the cost down. So now you have this really interesting market where Meta is very deeply in the market. And then you have Google coming to market later this year. You have rumors about Apple. I mean, Apple rumors are always hard to trust until they actually announce a product, but certainly the rumors are pretty strong. You have a lot of Chinese players like Xreal, Vitur, even Realities, who are my sort of daily glasses if I had to pick a pair that I wear daily. Engo, which is a French company that specializes in glasses for athletes. So you have a lot of growth and interest in the market. Um, and with that comes, I think, some backlash and some questioning. But I think broadly, this year is really the year that things are going to start ramping up really well. The issue then becomes how do we get this to scale throughout organizations? How do we get organizations, not just in industrial and manufacturing, right? I think those are great use cases. I think they're kind of low hanging fruit. But again, if we look at these glasses, your daily wearable, how does anyone use these glasses? How do lawyers use these glasses? Doctors use these glasses? There are great medical use cases out there that I've seen with some of these glasses. Um, how do these glasses become the thing that we just wear every day and kind of do everything with? Much like we're using our smartphones. Like navigating that transition in the next 5 to 10 years is going to be really, really critical for the success of these products.
And on that camera question, which you mentioned, Meta's own backlash and even realities deciding to do away with the camera altogether, can the controlled environment of the office and the workplace actually help set some kind of healthy norm or recording norm, as it were?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, like, I'm less fussed about the camera than I think most people would be. I have a hard time getting that upset about it, honestly. And I wear the Meta glasses and I record in public. I follow all the laws in New York. But I've had great success recording fun moments and interesting things. And I think people have this very sort of strange paranoia about being secretly recorded. And when you start asking actual questions about, well, what are the outcomes of this? Then very quickly you realize I think people just have this sort of thing blown up in their heads that might not be real. There's also this weird misogyny with a lot of these sort of pushback against meta glasses. Like, people call them the pervert glasses. And my question is like, oh, so women are not like legally allowed to wear them and film back? And that's where those people are sort of like, oh, yeah, I never thought of that. And it was like, well, Listen, I don't want to cast aspersions, but the New York Times recently reported on a lot of data center opposition being actually like astroturfed by other countries. Given the really consistent messaging against meta glasses, I'm just going to leave that there as something people can kind of think about and draw logical conclusions. But I think there's this real kind of deep misogyny that like only men can use these glasses and only men. It's like, no, anyone who has money can buy these glasses and use them, and they're great, right? You can decide how you use them and how you capture the world. And, but I think in the office environment, you're right. There is a different expectation of privacy when it is a work device. I think if that is not clear to people, then they really need to think about that, right? So understanding that, yeah, the glasses can be used for a lot of interesting things. Now, obviously, if you're using the glasses for, revenge porn or upskirting, which the physics of that to me are quite challenging, but okay. Uh, then obviously there are laws against that. Those laws should be enforced. But I think what's happening is people are looking at these glasses and kind of getting ahead of themselves. So there have been a handful of cases of people using glasses for harassment. Obviously, that's terrible. But if you look at people using smartphones or other hidden cameras for that, it's 100x, that much happening. So I think people are just weirdly in their heads about it. I think there's a very strong anti-tech vibe happening right now with AI and with smart glasses. Obviously, a lot of leaders of these companies have done themselves a tremendous disservice by getting up there and saying AI will take all your jobs and I'll still be rich. That's maybe not the messaging you want. Um, but I think separating that out from kind of the practical use cases for these glasses, of which there are many, is really important. And so to bring it back to the work environment, yeah, having people use the glasses on a daily basis, having them, use it to translate documents, having them use it to identify people in their work environments. Like there are a lot of interesting use cases for these glasses in the corporate space and in the industrial space and manufacturing space, many of which are aided by using the cameras. And I think that's just going to help people get more and more comfortable with the concept of this.
Now, you've got a book called The Spatial Race. It says we're moving from technology that we visit, put on a headset, or open an app, to technology we actually live with. Paint the everyday picture for me for the next few years and why you call it currently a race.
Yeah, I mean, this goes back to what people talked about with the innovator's dilemma, which came out so many years ago, and I believe Clayton Christensen has actually passed away now, which is sad. But that book, if you're not familiar with the book, it's basically the idea that more established companies tend to get entrenched. They tend to think, well, this is how we've always done things. We don't need to do new things. They have these bureaucratic layers. They kind of assume the world will remain as is. Then you have these upstart companies that come in and kind of disrupt them. And if the more entrenched companies can't quickly catch up and get ahead, then they have trouble, right? So the foundational one is Netflix and Blockbuster Video in the US, right? Blockbuster could have innovated in the direction of Netflix. They could have improved what they were doing. They could have bought Netflix at one point. They actually decided not to, right? And, Blockbuster now is a distant nostalgic memory for people my age. And Netflix, of course, is Netflix, right? So that's kind of the most famous example. So the way I look at it is it's a race to determine, okay, who is going to actually build the future? Who is going to come in and succeed versus who is going to fall by the wayside? And we now see so much rapid churn in markets, and companies that were, world beating a few years ago are now just falling apart. And so really understanding that everyone needs to get into this race. And the title is a little bit of a take or a pun on the space race, because again, we're now seeing competition not just in the US, not just in the Western markets, but huge competition in China, huge competition from other markets, and really figuring out, okay, who's gonna win? And it doesn't have to be a zero-sum game. There can be a lot of victors and a lot of people who build successful products, but you have to move quickly. You can't just sit around, and I see so many companies just sort of sitting on their hands saying, "Oh yeah, we'll wait for this to happen. We'll kind of wait and wait." And like you can't wait. Like if you wait, you will get crushed. And so I think especially now given everything that's happening in China, all the developments that they have there with AI and their smart glasses developments, right? So understanding that you have to move quickly And I think that's where it really comes in the book is, okay, what is the roadmap for the next 10 years if you want to move quickly?
Your new Forbes piece argues that smart glasses need their own BlackBerry moment before an iPhone one.
Oh, the crackberry. Yeah, I mean, so basically, this goes back to what I was saying a few minutes ago, where enterprise adoption is often the path to mainstream adoption. So if you look at personal computers, those were work devices for the most part before they were personal devices. If you look at smartphones, people didn't have personal phones for a long time. They had phones that they used for work, and then they started using them for personal. And now, of course, they are just fused to our hands, they're fused into our being. So rather than trying to sell smart glasses to, influencers, consumers, young people, really looking at how do we get people comfortable with this technology? And if you're using it in a work environment, A, the adoption curve is easier because if your boss says you have to do X, then in this market anyway, you'll do X. And B, that creates a level of comfort, right? People are more comfortable with devices they are more used to, they use them in controlled environments. And then they sort of see, like, okay, well, this could also be good for home use. I'll take this home with me. I'll build this personal thing on top of this device. So I think really targeting enterprise as the growth vertical is a smart move for a lot of these companies. And some of them are taking this more to heart than others. Even Realities is a good example. I wrote about them recently. I think I mentioned them in that piece, where a huge amount of their user base is executives age 30 to 50 who are using it for transcription and translation and teleprompter and, just sort of getting information, chatting with the AI, getting information in their glasses, and really looking at like that market, which I think has been underserved by a lot of other players, and getting people again. There's a form factor and a comfort that needs to happen, and that's where I think you can really get in and sort of start early and get people used to working with these glasses, using these glasses in an environment that feels controlled and safe, and then having it sort of spread outwards.
Yeah, as I mentioned, I can only stomach just 2 hours of my smart glasses, but things have moved on in the current state of the art, haven't they?
Yeah, even Realities glasses I wear pretty much all day, especially if I'm out and about. I don't wear them as much at home. Sometimes I'll just put them on the charger because I don't need them as much when I'm just sitting in my office doing a podcast or answering emails. But if I'm out and about, I'm using them for maps, I'm using them for notifications, I'm using them for a lot of different things. And the battery life is pretty solid. They're very comfortable, they're very light. Some of the other glasses are still like a little too heavy at this point, but that'll get fixed. That'll change. I mean, if you look at the size of computers 30 years ago compared to what we have now, right? Things get smaller, they get lighter, they get faster, they get cheaper. That's just how it's always worked. And so, yeah, I definitely think we're in early days, but I do think it's very, very important in this early sort of period to really think about how are we building for the glasses, what are we using them for, and really have a deep understanding of what the next step is going to look like with these.
Now, you run several types of programs for businesses, don't you? Tackling workplace exclusion, racial bias, mental health, and much more. Why do immersive experiences shift perspective and behavior in ways traditional training just can't match?
Yeah, so what you're referring to is stuff that I built for virtual reality training, where basically we build training simulations about workplace inclusion, racial bias, child welfare, all of these, very important topics. And really, the key that gets unlocked with virtual reality in particular is the sense of immersion and presence. So many well meaning people have made many, many well meaning videos and well meaning PowerPoints about how much it sucks to be excluded in the workplace. And everyone could sit through that and everyone could sort of nod along and say, oh, yeah, that's terrible. I would never want to do that. But then they forget it because they don't understand what it feels like. So in VR, you can put someone in a headset. They are represented as themselves. They are in a situation they experience as themselves. And they can understand firsthand what it is like to be on the receiving end of a bias incident, to what it is like to be left out in a workplace discussion. And the idea that you come as yourself to me is very, very critical. Just asking somebody to put on a headset and pretend to be somebody else, like, that doesn't quite move the needle. But letting somebody feel those emotions as themselves in VR, that's never been available before, and that's what's so incredibly powerful about it. And, we see these incredible results coming out of trials of these simulations that we've built, and it does frustrate me that more people didn't kind of pick up on this. And I think there's a lot of political reasons and budget reasons and all sorts of things that are, you know, that's factor into that. But it's just it's so different. Like, the amount of people who've gone through experiences that I've built and cried or had very emotional experiences, very emotional reactions, to me, I'm really proud of that. That's something that I wouldn't see otherwise. And yeah, I sound kind of crazy when somebody takes off the headset and they're in tears. I'm like, yes, amazing. But that's the response I want. Like, that's what I'm looking for. Somebody feels something. Somebody really not just feels something, but is motivated to make a change. And we see virtual reality training in particular lead often to really amazing change and outcomes.
Now, in the creative industry, and as a performer myself, I'm often asked about a nagging question: isn't AI going to take over our jobs? And I like to answer that with a question of my own. When was the last time that you saw or heard AI making humans really feel and deeply connect? Yeah, that's my take on it. What do you make of that?
So I wrote a piece for Forbes a while ago because I noodled on that idea, just what you said, for a minute, and I did some research. And what I found in terms of creativity and acting in particular, AI has had an effect, but not the effect you think it has. So, I don't think AI will replace human actors in, well, certainly not in theater, but in film, TV anytime soon. I think there are really interesting AI tools out there to, control background noise or, smooth out somebody's accent. And that's fine. Just like post production pipeline stuff, totally fine, whatever. But where it's having the biggest impact actually is the second order effect of young actors that are just starting out or actors that are maybe more experienced in between jobs, because it's such a volatile market. They now have many fewer opportunities to actually make money as they lead up to gigs or between gigs. So where AI has been really impactful is not in, a movie that's on Netflix or a movie that goes to an independent theater. It's what the term is industrials. So industrials are the bread and butter of most working actors. They're not glamorous. They're not made for the public. They are, for example, the video that a Fortune 100 company makes about not taking corporate, not taking kickbacks, and they make employees watch it. Like, they, until recently, would cast real young actors. Now, again, that didn't go on anyone's reel. No one's earning prizes for it, but it paid. It paid reasonably well, and you could pay your rent with it as you went on auditions for, TV gigs. So that has now been almost entirely replaced with AI. There's a company called Synthesia where you can just create an AI, you just put in a script, and you can update it anytime you want, and that's your corporate training video. So that has been one interesting knock-on effect. And the other is AI has, I think, a lot of the jobs that were kind of the 9 to 5 day jobs that actors would take as they were, again, working and building up their reels, those jobs have been displaced by AI because you don't need someone to answer the phone or take notes or make coffee, right? All of these sort of basic things, these entry level jobs have been really displaced. And so what's happened is you're seeing a contraction of people who are actually able to pursue acting or the creative arts in any form as a career, unless they have, family money or something like that, because they can't do these backup jobs, these secondary jobs, right? And yeah, I mean, there's even still wait tables, but more and more people are competing for fewer and fewer jobs doing that. And so I think it's going to have a really interesting effect on the arts and creativity, but not in the way that people think. Like, AI generated music, I don't think will ever displace human generated music in a meaningful way. It's going to become its own genre. But much like there are still rock bands, even though hip hop exists, then, AI music will just kind of be there. It'll be in the background. Um, but I think more broadly, it will displace a lot of other opportunities. And this is where people get upset about the strangest things. Like, there's this backlash against, corner shops that use AI to generate images of sandwiches. And I was like, I think you guys are just going after the wrong people. There are much bigger issues to think about than the fact that your deli guy used AI to generate a picture of a hamburger. Like, I think we're upset about the wrong thing, people. But, I think people just get very swept up in this, and they don't really understand what they're criticizing a lot of the time. And so I think for folks that are leaders, right, folks that work in corporate, folks that have actual meaningful need to know about this stuff, right, understanding, like, okay, what actually is happening here right now, and how can we actually use this in a way that is meaningful and solves problems? I think that's where a lot of the disconnect is, and that's where people are getting stuck.
Well, some of the production sector does argue that AI technologies are democratizing creativity. What do you say to them?
What's interesting is actually the tools cost a lot of money. So there have been big layoffs, and I read about this recently as well. There have been pretty big layoffs at Disney and several other production companies and media companies recently. And they've shifted to freelance models. So basically and this is a very American thing to do. It's different labor laws in different countries. But in America, what'll happen a lot of the time is they fire everyone and then they rehire them as freelancers so they don't have to pay for their health insurance. And that's terrible, but I'm going to set that aside for a second. So what they do besides that is they also transfer the cost of, licenses and creation and time to these freelancers. So all of a sudden what you see is the cost of using AI for post-production can get very, very, very expensive, right? Working on video is incredibly heavy. It uses a lot of compute power, it uses a lot of tokens. One of the reasons that OpenAI killed Sora relatively fast after it launched was because it was just using so much compute power and so many tokens, and they were getting no return out of it. It was just people making these goofy videos. And so I think, again, looking at like what is the cost of using these tools and understanding that, in terms of production and post production, yeah, on one hand, it could democratize it. On the other hand, it's already pretty democratized. Like we have plenty of DIY tools. We have plenty of tools that anyone can use if they want to. And then it becomes like, okay, well, what is the quality, right? I could go like, listen, there's a guitar sitting in my living room because my husband plays music. Could I go strum on that guitar and sing over it? Yeah, sure. I could do that right now and record it on my phone. But guess what? I have a terrible singing voice and I don't really know how to play guitar. So, I mean, yeah, the tools have always been democratized, right? Maybe it's a little bit easier for me to put it on YouTube versus, having to send it around to record labels. But, I think it's more like people like if you want to create, you can create. And that's been the case for a long time now. I think AI certainly some, editing pipeline work will be a lot easier to do, and that's great. But again, I don't think it's going to have that effect that people think it's going to have. I don't think we're going to be watching AI generated, movies on Netflix anytime soon. Um, is it going to create slop? Sure, people are already creating slop. Whenever I look at TikTok, I see a lot of human created slop. You know, what's the cappuccino? There's like a famous Italian AI slop, the ballerina cappuccino, Italian brain rot. Like I'll see Italian brain rot, and then I'll see a video of like some woman just yelling at a camera about how somebody cut her off in traffic, and I was like, okay, they're both slop. One is human and one is not, but they're both equally terrible and bad for you. Uh, and so, yeah, again, I think a lot of people are just kind of upset and nervous about maybe things that are less going to be less impactful without thinking about the things that actually are going to be impactful.
Now, you've also talked previously about companies being stuck in a kind of pilot purgatory. What do you mean by that? And what keeps those businesses stuck there?
Even I've built projects for companies that had incredible returns. Like I don't want to brag too much, but we're talking about 75% reduction in worker training costs, right? Huge savings, huge reductions in employee turnover, huge increases in employee satisfaction. Um, and even those projects that to me seem so clearly set up to succeed and then grow kind of stall out because people don't have a plan for beyond, okay, we're going to do one thing. So I think there's a lot of different things there. One is that people are generally loath to commit to doing things long term. The other is that when companies invest in this stuff, they invest in kind of on the margins and they don't really think about, well, what is our long-term growth? So what is our strategy? If we build a VR piece and it goes really well, how do we build then 10 more VR pieces? How do we expand the training through 10 other different lines of the business? And that's very hard to get companies to think about and agree to. So, my whole approach has been, okay, let's do a pilot, that's fine. But understand that if the pilot hits these metrics, money will get unlocked. The second problem that I think a lot of companies have, and this is a really much bigger problem, is that they don't actually know what problems they're solving. So when I first started working on VR, I would have companies come to me and say, we want to do VR. And I was like, great, what do you want to do? Oh, I don't know, but we just have to do VR. And I'm like, that's not how it works, guys. Like, I don't know how to tell you that that's not how it works. You need to find a problem that is creating an actual, actual bottleneck or costing you actual money. You need to understand, will this work if I use VR to actually train people to help fix this? And then you need to understand what the KPIs are, and then you need to understand how you scale it, right? And so I think what we've seen with VR is a lot of people just rushed into making VR and didn't think about that. What we see now with a lot of AI, and this is a really big challenge, is a lot of companies said, we need to be AI first, and we need the, they fired all these people, they did all these things, they got everyone the tools, but they didn't actually stop to consider, like, are these tools going to meaningfully make work better? And so there are, I think, a lot of tools out there that do make work meaningfully better. I use GenSpark to create decks, right? Saves me a ton of time. Great tool. I use Lovable to create microsites. Saves me a ton of time. Great tool. I use different, tools to organize my emails or take notes. And I think there's a lot of useful tools out there. But I think a lot of the time there was just this, sort of message from on high from corporate, oh, use VR or use AI. And people were just like, well, no, this, if anything, it makes my job harder. I think you also have, again, and this comes back to this weird narcissism that I'm seeing a lot of, where, I run into people who are like, oh, my coworker used AI to write an email about scheduling a meeting with her boss next week. And I was like, who cares? It's literally an email that's like, do you have 20 minutes to meet with Jim to discuss the KPIs? Like, I don't need that to be artisanal, handcrafted, human written. That's like the lowest level of email, right? If I'm reading the New Yorker short story of the week, obviously I want that to be human generated. I don't particularly care if an email is on some, scheduling a meeting or following up on, KPIs or whatever. Like, I don't care. So I think people again have this weird sort of sensitivity about it, and I think they don't real I think there's just a lot of, like, judgment around using AI as a tool, and some of it's warranted, some of it isn't. But again, I think it comes back to the fact that there's so much confusion and bad vibes and this weird kind of main character syndrome about being angry that your colleague used AI to generate an email about scheduling a meeting. It's like, yeah, I think there's bigger fish to fry in the world, girly. Um, but I use AI to write emails all the time. I would never use it to write a personal email, right, to my friend to catch up on what she's been up to, but I totally use it for work all the time because, like, literally, why wouldn't I? Give me one good reason I have to artisanally handcraft an email to set a meeting to talk about something. Like, I don't. It's a waste of my time and their time. Um, and I think there's also been a lot of like false promises with AI and work on both sides in terms of how well it works, and I think we hit a lot of roadblocks along walls with AI. But again, it comes back to the fundamental question of like, what problem are you solving and how are you solving it? And I think that's where people fall down and get stuck in pilot purgatory is they don't have a functional understanding of like that one basic concept.
Now, I think it's fair to say that you lead one of the world's first university accredited smart glasses curriculums, and you've taught at Caltech, NYU, and Barnard. What one or two skills do you feel that leaders and workers should be developing and building right now?
I mean, so with the smart glasses design course, which is available at New Mexico State University, and I've spoken at, many, many institutions as well. So I think it's understanding like what can be done in the short term in smart glasses. So what can you take that probably already exists, whether it's in an app or whether it's a skill, and put it in smart glasses, right? I think that's stage one. And then how do you design for that? How do you make sure it's not, cognitively overloading people? How do you make sure it's easy to use? How do you make sure it's, something that people are going to want? So I think I cover a lot of that. And the second thing I cover is what are the things that only smart glasses can unlock? And I think that's where it's going to get really interesting is we're going to hit a point in a couple of years where enough people have the glasses and the glasses are established enough, far enough along, where we're going to start building things that are unique to smart glasses. So an example of this, if you compare it to smartphones, when smartphones first came out, when the iPhone first came out in 2020, 2006, it was basically like a computer. It was like a phone with a computer, right? It was like you had a phone, you had a browser, you had a couple other things, right? These are all things that existed in disparate devices before, but they were just sort of put together, which in and of itself was totally fine. But then you got this ecosystem of businesses that could not have existed without smartphones. So Uber, Lyft, whatever ride sharing service you want to think about is one of those that I come back to as an example. Like Uber could not exist without smartphones. Certainly we called car services before smartphones, right? In New York City, you got taxi cabs, whatever. London, you got taxi cabs. But the broad idea of Uber only exists with smartphones. So then what does a smart glasses first app look like? That's something that I'm playing around with a lot. I think there's a lot of really interesting places to go with it. But yeah, understanding like what do you have to think about now in the next couple of years, which is just designing for the glasses. And then what do you think about next, which is how do you build entire new ecosystems, entire new platforms on the glasses?
Now, very finally, for someone who feels intimidated or even overwhelmed by the pace of change at the moment, what would you say to them?
Just start learning. I mean, I think like, look, I'm not a machine learning engineer. I don't claim to be. I know how to use different AI tools, but certainly I'm not a Harvard machine learning engineer, and just I'm not. So you don't need to go so deep, right? You don't need to be out there building tons of agents or doing tons of things, but you do need to understand the basics. It's the same with smart glasses. Get a pair. There's a lot of different pairs out there. Go try them and see what you like, and have a think about like what could I build? What could I use these for? There's a lot of like interesting low hanging fruit use cases, and so then look at what are my biggest problems right now, and are these technologies useful solutions? And sometimes they're not, right? I've been brought in to build VR experiences and looked at what the problem is and been like, this isn't your solution, guys, and call it a day. So I think it's really about figuring out what are the problems that I'm having that I would like to solve, and then how do I solve them using these technologies if I can.
Cortney Harding from New York, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Cortney Harding there from New York. Well, if today's conversation sparked ideas for your team or next event, Cortney is available to book through the Closer Speakers Consultancy now. Details are on the screen and in the show notes. This has been The Closer Cut with me, Waseem Mirza.